What's the strangest conversation you've accidentally eavesdropped on? Black family in the Christmas decorations aisle. 3-year-old. Dad, can we get a white man for Christmas? Shocked dad. What? 3-year-old. A white man points at shelf. Shocked dad. Looks where son is pointing and laughs. No son. That's called a snowman. Heard over a cube wall at work. You promised that we would get a divorce after you got your green card. A few kids were debating on what happened to the poop after you flushed it on the train. One believed it exploded on impact with the rails. Another debated the possibility of it being shot out of the side like a cannon. And another knew it was used to fuel the train. He knew it was used as fuel. Not something I heard. But what someone eavesdropped on me. I used to work at a restaurant. And every member of the kitchen staff was Indian. And didn't speak English very well. There was one white guy that worked there. And for whatever reason, they all called him Ding Ding. White guy was having a birthday party. And invited us all. One of the Indian guys and myself were standing outside the restaurant smoking. And the Indian guy says to me, Indian accent, "Hey man, you going to Ding Ding party?" A guy walking by us stopped and said, "I'm sorry. I just overheard you guys. And I have to know what a Ding Ding party is." I couldn't stop laughing. And eventually told him what it was. Didn't hear the full conversation, but I walked in on 2 employees at a convenience store with the conversation ending with the phrase, "And that's when we hid the clams." Killing time in Starbucks before my bus comes when 2 well-dressed businessmen walk in. "Hey. Crazy day yesterday." Haha. Yeah. I didn't know you could train dogs to do that. It haunts me. I have so many questions that will never be answered. Ah yes. The old peanut butter trick. A. Once listened to a story a woman was telling her friend sitting next to me in a cafe. She became suspicious of her husband cheating on her when she was helping him unpack from a business trip and noticed a weird white stain on his shirt. She told the whole story of her googling how to figure out what it was. Which I think included using specific light and stuff. Never actually got to hear the ending though. Unfortunately. Using a black light lets you see stains from human fluids. Life pro tip. Don't do this in a hotel room that you want to sleep comfortably in. What if it was just mayonnaise? I was on the train listening to a woman yell on the phone that she wouldn't be able to make it to her dentist appointment because she had left her teeth at home. I overheard 2 guys on the subway in Nick discussing what was the perfect handgun caliber to whack someone. There was a small dude who was adamant that the best gun was a 9mm because that's what cops use. Then the big dude starts shaking his head negatively. Goes on to give a small speech about anatomy and ballistics. Then proceeds to state that a competent assassin would use a mere .22 handgun. Since it's hard to track. Ammo is cheap and you can mag dump someone in the head without anyone knowing it's gunfire. I think those guys were on their way to the Hitman convention. I once sat on my balcony, 3rd floor, at 2 AM to listen to a guy, ground level, who discovered his girlfriend was cheating on him, 4th floor. He climbed a tree and saw her topless with a guy with her light on. I opened a beer and took a seat. You said you were studying. You don't study with your shirt off. I was once in a Starbucks in Boston and witnessed a breakup which was immediately followed a failed proposal attempt. It was the craziest thing. The dude was very into her and her body language did not reply in a copacetic manner. He confessed his love to her. She replied that it wasn't gonna work and she might need some time. He replied, "We have the rest of our lives to figure it out. So you have time though." He got down on and he pulled out a ring. She stood up and said, "This is what I am talking about." "You don't listen." She asked him to stand up. He said with tears in his eyes, "Why?" "I am still waiting for an answer." She gathered her things, took left out the back. The man sat back down and finished his frappuccino while crying. I refer to the story as the saddest cold coffee beverage ever. Maybe it's just me. But I think that goes beyond merely not listening. Me and some co-workers were eating lunch outside on a patio and all of a sudden 2 guys walk by and one goes, "I was going on down her and forget I was allergic to peanuts so I spent the night in a hospital." We started cracking up and the guy noticed and said, "What?" "It happens." How to explain that one in the emergency room? There's this girl I know and I had forgotten how much she likes Reese's peanut butter cups. I swear. She eats one with every meal. So I take her to my place and the wine starts flowing. I was eating beside two older gentlemen at a bar. And I hear one of them say something like, "That stupid cat follows me everywhere. I've told my granddaughter to keep it away from me. But everyone thinks it's funny. I can't get away from it." There's silence between the two. And then the second older man laughs. "You secretly love that little hairball, don't you?" The guy lets out a giant, irritated sigh and sullenly admits, "Yes." Coming home on Amtrak from visiting my family a few years ago, a young 20-something couple sits behind me. And they clearly have just gotten engaged. They're happy. They're talking to each other in just the most loving, affectionate way. And discussing plans for their upcoming wedding. It's all good. This is clearly a happy and excited couple. And you could tell this was probably the first discussion they'd had about their wedding plans. So the girl happily brings up something about what they should have on the menu. Like 2 or 3 choices for the adults. But then a 4th option that the kids would like. And the guy goes, "Kids? I don't want kids there." Instantly, the temperature in the train car drops about 10 degrees. She goes, "You don't? How can we not let kids there? We have family members with kids. Kids have to be allowed." Then he says, and this is a point I thought was very valid, he says, "Having kids at the wedding or having a child-free wedding makes it a very different kind of ceremony. It's not just a matter of kids are allowed, kids aren't allowed. It changes the tone of the whole thing." Which actually I agree with. I'm not married. But I've been to plenty of weddings that were kid-free and some that were kids allowed. And they were both very different. The train ride was 3.5 hours. And the conversation just got worse and worse the whole way. Again, to give the prospective groom credit, he stayed very calm and tried to be rational about it. She went from glowingly happy to less happy, to attempted neutrality to furious. By the time we got to our destination, she was crying and yelling at him. He made points that if we don't have kids at our wedding, it doesn't mean we don't like kids. Or don't love our family members who have kids. It just means that if we want a more adult, intimate wedding, it's something we need to strongly consider. I wondered about them later on. If that was something that was clearly a deal breaker for both of them. My downstairs neighbors were having a fight. I was listening to a woman yelling, "Did you F her? Did you F her?" over and over. It really got exciting when another woman answered, "No. No. I didn't." Oh man, it's so possible this was me. Had this exact same thing happened to me. I'm a guy BTW, but here's how it went down. We were downstairs at an apartment complex and this girl I knew got kicked out of her apartment by her girlfriend. I went over there to try to play peacekeeper. But I basically told her, "GF, look, if you don't let her come inside and stay here, I'm going to take her home with me." The girl started screaming at me. "Did you F her? Did you F her?" I was quietly saying, "No, I didn't. I just don't want her sleeping outside. I'm trying to do the right thing here." Other girl finally yells, "No, I didn't sleep with him." Of course. The odds of it actually being what you heard years ago is unlikely. I just figured I'd share. I was in line for a roller coaster years ago when I overheard a 12-year-old and her even younger sister talking to 2 nice strangers, all standing in line behind me. The 12-year-old was talking about how she lives on a farm with her grandparents, her little sister and her newborn kid. She goes on and on about her young kid. And how her grandparents homeschool her so she has time to raise and take care of her kid, and how her little sister is helping too. She goes on to describe how little and precious and sweet her kid is and how much she loves her. I spent the entire time in line stunned and speechless and impressed by how engaged and unbothered the 2 strangers were during the whole conversation, i.e. asking to see pictures, etc. It wasn't until we got to the front of the line that I realized she meant kid, as in a baby goat. As a person who has raised goats, I have always loved surprising people with statements like that because people don't think about a kid being anything other than human. I once was taking with a friend in high school and stated, "Yeah, I've had to kill a couple kids before." If you do it right it tastes really good and I got several very weird looks from the surrounding tables. To college age dudes walking by me. And that's why I'm going to hell. No. You're going to hell because of all that D you suck. That's true. I do suck a lot of D. Back in grade school. My mom would pick me up from school, then we'd go back to her office and I'd wait there until her last class for the day ends. One time, one of her co-teachers just barged into her office and talked about how tired she was because she had gotten married the weekend before and she and her new husband had been having a lot of since. They ended up talking about it as if I wasn't in the room. Two guys on a plane. Flying to a wedding. Sounded like they were in the wedding party. They were going back and forth about how the bride had fed at least half the groomsmen. And even one of the bridesmaids. It sounded like it happened in the past. Rather than an infidelity thing. But maybe those guys were super casual about adultery. They were trying to figure out if the groom knew. They decided he probably didn't know. So then they were arguing the merits of telling him vs keeping their mouth shut. They never came to a conclusion on the plane. She sounds like one interesting woman. Well, sort of the opposite. But when I was in high school, we would run laps around the perimeter drive of our football field for pay. And part of this drive was right up next to a bunch of classrooms. A lot of times, teachers would have the windows open. My high school is an old Frankenstein of additions from the last 120 years. So we still have windows that open and close. So my friends and I made it a point to have the absolute weirdest conversations we could right next to any of these open windows in an effort to distract and confuse anyone who happened to be listening from inside. I think my favorite starter anecdote was, and I shamelessly stole this from Whose Line, and that's how my colon ended up in my esophagus. I was later told by one of the teachers who recognized me that their whole class stopped and confusedly looked at each other before laughing it off. It was one of my proudest moments. Messing with strangers like that is one of the funnest things you can do. Childish but fun as F. Dude walking down Collins Ave by South Beach in Miami on his cell phone. Said, "But baby, you know I gots to slap you if you piss me off." She had left him and he was calling her to plead for her to come back to him. He sounded genuinely upset. Gangster type sitting behind me on the bus. On his phone. Rationalizing murdering his ex-girlfriend and anybody who got in the way to a friend of his trying to talk him out of it. The gangster was telling his friend that this was something that Jesus would do. The next few days I kept an eye on local news and thankfully no reports of anybody being murdered. Makes you wonder which translation of the Bible he was reading. I heard I had to go get an exorcism this weekend. I was sitting in the food court of a mall. Eating and minding my own business. A couple passed by my table and all I heard was her say to him, "Because my head went numb when you were laying on it last night." I will never, ever get any context for what I heard. In the library and a girl on the phone says, "Baby, just come over, I want to make love to you." And make spaghetti. I know I can't change the past but I can change your future. I know I can't change the past but I can make the pasta.